The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Harrison's parade ground as hundreds of soldiers assembled in perfect formation. The crisp October air carried the sound of marching boots and barked commands as the base prepared for its most prestigious annual ceremony. The Medal of Honor recognition event. This year's gathering was special, drawing dignitaries, families, and veterans from across the country to honor those who had served with distinction. Brigadier General Marcus Thornfield adjusted his dress uniform one final time as he reviewed his notes in the command tent. At 52, Thornfield had built his reputation on strict discipline and unwavering adherence to military protocol. His chest bore an impressive collection of ribbons and medals earned through 3 decades of service, including tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Known throughout the military community for his no-nonsense approach, Thornfield demanded perfection from everyone under his command. The general's aide, Captain Jennifer Walsh, approached with the final guest list. "Sir, we have confirmation that all honorees and their families have arrived. The ceremony will proceed as scheduled at 1,100 hours. Thornfield nodded curtly, his steel-gray eyes scanning the list of names. Among the decorated veterans being honored today was a collection of heroes from different eras of American military history. Some were World War II veterans in their 90s, their wheelchairs adorned with blankets bearing unit insignia. Others were younger men and women who had served in more recent conflicts, their stories of courage and sacrifice no less remarkable. Outside the tent, the base hummed with activity. Military families filled the bleachers, children pointing excitedly at the formations of soldiers. Local dignitaries took their assigned seats, while photographers positioned themselves for the best angles. The ceremony would be broadcast live to military installations worldwide, making it crucial that everything proceed flawlessly. Among the gathering crowd, one figure seemed oddly out of place. An elderly man, in a worn but clean veteran's jacket, sat quietly in the designated honor section, his weathered hands folded in his lap. His name tag read, William Chen, and despite his advanced age, his posture remained straight and dignified. The jacket bore faded patches from units that few people would recognize today. Remnants of conflicts that had faded from public memory. Chen had arrived early that morning, traveling alone from a small town 3 hours away. Unlike the other honorees who were accompanied by large family entourages and media attention, he sat by himself, occasionally nodding politely to those around him. His presence had been almost an afterthought to the ceremony planners. His name had been added to the list only a week prior, after a routine database search had identified him as eligible for recognition. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Morrison, the ceremony's coordinator, noticed Chen sitting alone and approached him with a warm smile. "Mr. Chen? I'm Lieutenant Colonel Morrison. Thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything you need to make you more comfortable?" The old veteran looked up with kind but tired eyes. "No thank you, Colonel. I'm fine right here. It's an honor to be included." Morrison noticed something in his demeanor that suggested humility beyond what she typically saw in the other honorees. Most veterans invited to such ceremonies carried themselves with a certain pride that came from years of recognition and community respect. Chen seemed different, as if he was surprised to be there at all. As the ceremony's start time approached, General Thornfield made his final inspection of the grounds. Everything had to be perfect. The formation of troops, the placement of flags, the timing of musical accompaniments. His reputation depended on executing flawless military ceremonies, and today's event would be watched by senior Pentagon officials who could influence his next promotion. The general's attention was drawn to a minor commotion near the honor section. A group of young soldiers was struggling to set up additional chairs for late-arriving family members. Their efforts, while well-intentioned, were disrupting the carefully planned seating arrangement and creating an unsightly cluster of mismatched furniture. "Sergeant!" Thornfield's voice carried across the area like a whip crack. The young, non-commissioned officer responsible for the setup jogged over, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Sir, we had 3 additional family members arrive unexpectedly, and we're trying to accommodate them without disrupting the formation." Thornfield's jaw tightened. The seating chart was finalized yesterday. No unauthorized changes are to be made to the ceremony setup. Move those people to the overflow section, or they don't attend. The sergeant glanced nervously toward the honor section, where elderly veterans and their families were already seated. "Sir, these are family members of Medal of Honor recipients. I thought perhaps we could make a small adjustment." "You thought wrong, Sergeant. Execute my orders immediately, or you'll find yourself explaining your decision-making process to the base commander." As the sergeant hurried away to reluctantly relocate the families, Chen observed the exchange quietly. He had witnessed similar scenes countless times throughout his military career. Moments where rigid adherence to rules conflicted with common sense and human compassion. Age and experience had taught him to recognize leaders who prioritized their own image over the welfare of those they served. The ceremony began precisely at 1,100 hours with the presentation of colors. The base's ceremonial guard marched with mechanical precision, their movements synchronized to the second. The national anthem echoed across the parade ground as hundreds of people stood at attention, hands over hearts, veterans and civilians alike, united in respect for the flag. General Thornfield took the podium with commanding presence, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Distinguished guests, fellow service members, and honored veterans, today we gather to recognize extraordinary acts of courage and sacrifice that embody the highest traditions of military service." The general's speech was polished and professional, hitting all the expected themes of duty, honor, and patriotism. He spoke of the debt owed to those who had served, the importance of remembering history, and the continuing mission to protect American values around the world. His delivery was flawless, each pause and emphasis calculated for maximum impact. As Thornfield continued his remarks, his eyes occasionally swept the audience, ensuring that proper military bearing was maintained throughout the ceremony. He noted with satisfaction that the relocated family members had been seated without further disruption, and the overall presentation maintained the dignity he demanded. The first phase of the ceremony proceeded smoothly through the presentation of awards to several contemporary veterans. Each honoree was called forward to receive recognition for specific acts of heroism. Their citations read aloud to detail the circumstances that had earned them this distinction. Families beamed with pride as photographers captured the moments of recognition. When Chen's name was called, he rose slowly from his chair and walked with measured steps toward the stage. Unlike the previous honorees who had been accompanied by detailed biographical introductions, the announcement was brief. William Chen, United States Army, for distinguished service during the Korean War. As Chen approached the podium, General Thornfield noticed for the first time the collection of faded patches on the veteran's jacket. Most were difficult to read due to age and wear, but their very presence suggested a long and varied military career. The general's trained eye also noticed something else. Despite his advanced age, Chen moved with the bearing of someone who had held significant responsibility. The ceremony continued as planned, but beneath the surface, subtle tensions were building. General Thornfield prided himself on running a tight ship, and he had little patience for anything that threatened the precise execution of military protocol. The day's events would soon test his ability to balance rigid adherence to regulations with the respect and dignity that America's veterans truly deserved. As Chen accepted his recognition and returned to his seat, few in the audience could have predicted that within the hour, this quiet ceremony would become the setting for a confrontation that would challenge everything General Thornfield believed about rank, respect, and the true meaning of military leadership. Following the formal presentations, the ceremony transitioned into a reception period where honored guests could mingle with active duty personnel and their families. Large white tents had been erected on the adjacent lawn, filled with refreshment tables and displays showcasing the history of Fort Harrison. The atmosphere was celebratory, with conversations flowing between generations of military service members. General Thornfield moved through the reception with practiced efficiency, engaging in brief conversations with dignitaries and senior officers. His aide followed discreetly, managing his schedule and ensuring he met with all the appropriate officials. Today's event was as much about networking and maintaining relationships as it was about honoring veterans. Near the historical display area, William Chen stood quietly examining a collection of photographs from various military campaigns. His weathered fingers traced the glass covering an image from the Korean War, showing soldiers in winter gear advancing through snowy terrain. The photograph captured the harsh conditions and determined faces of men who had fought in a conflict often called the Forgotten War. A young lieutenant approached Chen with genuine curiosity. "Sir, did you serve in Korea? I noticed your reaction to these photographs." Chen nodded slowly. "Yes. I was there from 1951 to 1953. Difficult times. But we did what was necessary." The lieutenant's eyes widened with respect. "What unit were you with, if you don't mind me asking?" "Several different assignments," Chen replied modestly. "I moved around quite a bit during my service." As they spoke, other young soldiers began to gather around the elderly veteran, drawn by his quiet dignity and obvious knowledge of military history. Chen found himself fielding questions about Korea, sharing stories that brought the black and white photographs to life with personal experiences and historical context. "The cold was unlike anything most of us had ever experienced," Chen explained to the growing group. "But the real challenge wasn't the weather. It was learning to work with allies from different countries, coordinating complex operations under extremely difficult conditions." Unknown to the gathering crowd, Colonel Harrison Webb had been observing the interaction from across the tent. Webb, the base's commanding officer, was a career soldier with 35 years of experience and a reputation for recognizing exceptional people regardless of their current circumstances. Something about Chen's demeanor and the way he commanded natural respect from the younger soldiers had caught his attention. Webb approached the group just as General Thornfield was making his way through the same section of the reception. The general's attention was initially focused on a conversation with a defense contractor representative, but he became aware of the cluster of soldiers gathered around Chen. "What's the situation here?" Thornfield inquired, his tone suggesting mild disapproval at seeing active duty personnel grouped casually around a civilian. The young lieutenant who had initiated the conversation straightened to attention. "Sir, Mr. Chen was sharing some experiences from Korea. The men were just interested in hearing first-hand accounts." Thornfield's expression hardened slightly. Military receptions had specific protocols for interaction between active duty personnel and guests. While informal conversation was expected, large gatherings around individual veterans could disrupt the flow of the event and create safety concerns in crowded spaces. "Gentlemen, I suggest you circulate and interact with all our honored guests rather than monopolizing one veteran's time," Thornfield said firmly. "Mr. Chen, I'm sure you understand the need to share your stories with a broader audience." Chen nodded respectfully. "Of course, General. I was just answering a few questions." As the young soldiers dispersed, Thornfield remained for a moment, studying Chen more closely. The general prided himself on being able to assess people quickly, and something about this particular veteran struck him as unusual. Chen carried himself with a confidence that seemed disproportionate to his modest presentation. Colonel Webb stepped forward at that moment. "General Thornfield, have you had a chance to meet William Chen? His service record is quite remarkable." Thornfield extended his hand in a perfunctory gesture. "Mr. Chen, thank you for your service. I hope you're enjoying the ceremony." "Thank you, General. It's been very well organized," Chen replied, accepting the handshake with a firm grip that surprised Thornfield with its strength. Webb continued, "Mr. Chen, the general here runs one of the finest installations in the military. His attention to detail and commitment to excellence are legendary throughout the service." Chen smiled politely. "I can see that. The ceremony has been executed flawlessly." As the conversation continued, a minor incident began to unfold that would escalate the situation dramatically. A group of elderly veterans, including several Medal of Honor recipients, had gathered near the refreshment table when one of them, a 90-year-old World War II veteran named Frank Morrison, began to feel dizzy from the heat and excitement. Morrison swayed slightly, and Chen immediately noticed the distress. Without hesitation, he moved to support the older veteran, helping him to a nearby chair and calling for water. The action was instinctive and compassionate, drawing the attention of everyone in the immediate area. "Someone get the medics," Chen called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to emergency situations. General Thornfield observed the scene with growing irritation. The sight of Chen taking charge of the situation without proper authorization violated his sense of order. In Thornfield's view, Emergency responses should go through proper military channels, not be initiated by civilian guests, regardless of their veteran status. Mr. Chen, Thornfield said sharply, approaching the group around Morrison. The medical staff will handle this situation. Please step back and allow the professionals to take control. Chen looked up from where he was kneeling beside Morrison, ensuring the veteran was stable. The gentleman just needs some air and hydration. He's going to be fine, but we should keep him cool until the medics arrive. Thornfield's jaw tightened. I gave you a direct instruction, Mr. Chen. Step away from the situation immediately. The tone of command in Thornfield's voice was unmistakable, and everyone in the vicinity turned to watch the exchange. Chen remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes that suggested he was not accustomed to being spoken to in such a manner. General, with respect, this veteran needs assistance right now. I'm not interfering with medical protocols. I'm providing basic first aid until professionals arrive. The public nature of the disagreement was exactly what Thornfield wanted to avoid at such a high-profile event. Military ceremonies required clear chains of command and unquestioned authority. Having a civilian veteran challenge his instructions in front of active duty personnel and distinguished guests was unacceptable. Mr. Chen, you will follow my instructions, or you will be escorted from this event, Thornfield said, his voice rising slightly. I will not have unauthorized individuals disrupting the proper procedures of this ceremony. Colonel Webb stepped closer, sensing that the situation was escalating beyond reasonable bounds. General, perhaps we should focus on ensuring Mr. Morrison receives appropriate care. Colonel, I am handling this situation, Thornfield snapped, his attention still fixed on Chen. Mr. Chen, you have been given a lawful order. Comply immediately. Chen slowly stood up, his movements deliberate and controlled. At his full height, he was nearly eye level with Thornfield, and the years had not diminished the bearing that had once commanded troops in combat. General, I understand your concern for protocol. However, I will not abandon a fellow veteran who requires assistance. The confrontation had drawn the attention of everyone in the tent. Conversations stopped as people turned to watch the unprecedented scene of a general publicly arguing with an elderly veteran. The situation had moved far beyond a simple disagreement about emergency procedures. It had become a test of wills between two men from different generations of military service. Thornfield felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. His authority was being challenged in the most public way possible, and his response would determine how he was perceived by everyone present. The general's face reddened as his anger reached a boiling point. Mr. Chen, you are in violation of direct orders from a senior military officer. Your attitude is insubordinate and disrespectful to this uniform and this ceremony. Chen's expression remained steady, but those who knew him well might have recognized the subtle signs of controlled anger. General, I have great respect for the uniform and for military service. However, my first obligation is to the welfare of my fellow veterans. That statement proved to be the final straw for Thornfield. In his mind, Chen had not only challenged his authority but had done so in a way that suggested the general's priorities were wrong. The public humiliation and direct contradiction of his orders triggered a response that would shock everyone present. Without warning, General Thornfield's right hand drew back as if to deliver a strike across Chen's face. The motion was swift and born of rage, a complete abandonment of military bearing and professional conduct. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it appeared that a serving general officer was about to physically assault an elderly veteran at a ceremony designed to honor military service. The tent fell completely silent. Every eye was fixed on the two men, and photographers instinctively raised their cameras. This moment would define both their careers and become a defining incident in the history of Fort Harrison. General Thornfield, the commanding voice of Colonel Webb, cut through the tense silence like a blade. His tone carried 35 years of military authority and was delivered with such force that every person in the tent instinctively straightened to attention. Thornfield's raised hand froze in midair as the spell of rage was broken by the unexpected intervention. Webb stepped directly between the two men, his presence commanding immediate respect from everyone present. General, sir, I need to speak with you immediately. There's something critical you need to understand about Mr. Chen, before this situation proceeds any further. Thornfield slowly lowered his hand, his face still flushed with anger but his military training reasserting control over his emotions. The public nature of what had almost occurred was beginning to register in his mind, along with the potential consequences of striking a veteran at a ceremony designed to honor their service. "Colonel, this man has been insubordinate and disruptive throughout this event," Thornfield said through clenched teeth, his voice struggling to maintain professional composure. "His behavior is unacceptable regardless of his veteran status." Webb glanced meaningfully at the crowd of witnesses before responding. "Sir, with respect, I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding. Mr. Chen's military record contains information that wasn't included in the ceremony briefing materials." Chen remained perfectly still throughout the exchange, his weathered face showing no emotion despite having come within seconds of being struck by a serving general officer. His calm demeanor in the face of such aggression spoke volumes about his character and experience with crisis situations. "What are you talking about, Colonel?" Thornfield demanded, his anger still evident but tempered by confusion over Webb's urgent intervention. Webb motioned toward the edge of the tent where they could speak with slightly more privacy. "General, I need you to accompany me to review Mr. Chen's complete service record. There are details that will fundamentally change your understanding of this situation." As the three men moved away from the crowd, whispered conversations began throughout the tent. The near assault had been witnessed by hundreds of people, including active duty personnel, veterans' families, media representatives, and local dignitaries. Cell phone cameras had captured the moment, and the implications for both officers involved were potentially career-ending. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who had been observing from a distance, quickly moved to check on Frank Morrison, the elderly veteran, whose medical episode had triggered the confrontation. The 90-year-old was now sitting comfortably with a cold water bottle and appeared to be recovering well from his momentary dizzy spell. In a quiet corner of the tent, Colonel Webb opened a leather portfolio containing official military documents that he had retrieved from his office during the reception. "General, I need you to look at this service record very carefully. Pay particular attention to the final rank and unit assignments." Thornfield took the documents with irritation, expecting to see the standard record of an enlisted soldier, or perhaps a junior officer. What he found instead caused his face to drain of color as the full magnitude of his mistake became clear. The official record showed that William Chen had retired from the United States Army with the rank of Brigadier General after 38 years of distinguished service. His assignments included multiple combat commands, senior staff positions at the Pentagon, and several classified special operations that couldn't be detailed in public documents. "This can't be right," Thornfield whispered, scanning the pages with growing disbelief. Webb continued quietly. "General Chen commanded the 7th Infantry Division during some of the most critical operations of the Korean War. He later served as a senior advisor during Vietnam and held several command positions at the Pentagon before retiring in 1983. His security clearance was so high that many of his accomplishments remain classified to this day." Thornfield's hands trembled slightly as he read through decorations that included multiple Silver Stars, the Distinguished Service Medal, and several foreign awards from allied nations. The record described a military career that spanned 4 decades and included responsibilities far beyond anything in Thornfield's own experience. "Why wasn't this information in the ceremony briefing?" Thornfield asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "General Chen specifically requested that his rank not be mentioned during the ceremony," Webb explained. "He wanted to be honored simply as a veteran, not for his command positions. The administrative staff processed him as William Chen, United States Army, at his personal request." As the devastating reality sank in, Thornfield realized that he had not only nearly assaulted a fellow veteran, but had actually attempted to strike a retired general officer whose military credentials far exceeded his own. The implications for his career, his reputation, and his personal integrity were catastrophic. Chen approached them quietly, his bearing unchanged, despite the revelation of his true identity. "Gentlemen, I believe we have a situation that needs to be resolved quickly and quietly for the benefit of everyone involved." Thornfield found himself unable to meet Chen's eyes. "Sir, I had no idea of your rank or service record. The briefing materials didn't indicate." "General Thornfield," Chen interrupted gently, "my rank is irrelevant to what happened here today. The issue isn't whether you knew my background. The issue is how you treated another human being who was trying to help a fellow veteran in distress." The wisdom and dignity in Chen's response only served to deepen Thornfield's shame. Here was an officer whose experience and accomplishments dwarfed his own, speaking with a grace and humility that highlighted the poverty of Thornfield's own behavior. Webb looked between the two men, understanding that the next few minutes would determine how this unprecedented situation would be resolved. "General Chen, the ceremony is still in progress, and there are hundreds of witnesses to what almost occurred. How would you prefer to handle this matter?" Chen considered the question thoughtfully. "Colonel, General Thornfield made a serious error in judgment under public circumstances. However, I believe in redemption rather than destruction. The question is whether the general has learned something from this experience that will make him a better leader." Thornfield finally found the courage to look directly at Chen. "Sir, I have disgraced myself, my uniform, and everything this ceremony represents. My behavior was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for my actions." "General," Chen replied calmly, "taking responsibility is the first step. But what matters now is what you do next. You have young soldiers looking up to you for leadership and guidance. How will you use this experience to become the officer they deserve?" The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who had been managing the reception in their absence. "Sirs, we have a developing situation. Several people recorded the incident on their phones, and there are questions about how to proceed with the remainder of the ceremony." Webb and Chen exchanged glances, both understanding that the story would inevitably spread beyond the confines of Fort Harrison. In the age of social media and instant communication, attempts to suppress the incident would likely backfire and create even greater controversy. "What's the current status of the reception?" Webb asked. The guests are understandably confused and concerned. Many of the veterans are asking about General Chen's background, and some of the younger soldiers are questioning what they witnessed. The media representatives are trying to determine if this is something they should report. Chen spoke up with the authority of someone who had dealt with crisis management at the highest levels of military command. "Colonel Morrison, please announce that there was a misunderstanding between myself and General Thornfield that has been resolved amicably. Emphasize that the focus should remain on honoring our veterans and celebrating their service." Thornfield stood quietly, recognizing that his own credibility was insufficient to manage the crisis he had created. The fact that Chen was taking charge of damage control only reinforced how completely he had failed as a leader. Over the next hour, the three officers worked together to manage the immediate aftermath of the incident. Chen personally spoke with concerned veterans and their families, downplaying the confrontation and redirecting attention to the positive aspects of the ceremony. His calm presence and obvious authority helped to stabilize the situation. Webb coordinated with the media representatives, providing a carefully crafted statement that acknowledged a disagreement between officers that was quickly resolved, without providing details that would sensationalize the story. His reputation for integrity lent credibility to the explanation. Thornfield found himself in the unprecedented position of following the lead of an officer he had nearly assaulted. The irony was not lost on him that Chen was demonstrating exactly the kind of leadership and crisis management skills that Thornfield had failed to display. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to depart, Thornfield requested a private meeting with Chen and Webb. In the empty command tent, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a triumphant day, the three men addressed the long-term implications of what had occurred. "General Chen," Thornfield began hesitantly, "I need to understand something. Why didn't you identify yourself when I began giving you orders? Why did you allow the situation to escalate to that point?" Chen's response was measured and thoughtful. "General, true leadership isn't about rank or position. It's about character and judgment. I was curious to see how far you would go when your authority was questioned. Unfortunately, you went further than I had hoped." The words struck Thornfield like a physical blow, but he recognized the truth in them. "What happens now? Do you intend to file a formal complaint?" "That depends entirely on what you learn from this experience," Chen replied. "Military leadership is about serving something greater than yourself. Today, your primary concern seemed to be protecting your own authority, rather than serving your soldiers and honoring our veterans. Webb added, General Thornfield, this incident will undoubtedly be reviewed by higher command. General Chen's discretion, in how he reports it, could significantly impact the outcome. Over the following weeks, the incident at Fort Harrison became a case study in military leadership schools across the country. While the specific details remained limited, the broad outline of a general, nearly striking a veteran, became a cautionary tale about the importance of humility, respect, and proper judgment under pressure. General Thornfield requested a transfer to a training command, where he could focus on developing the leadership skills he had so obviously lacked. His remaining military career was spent teaching young officers about the importance of character and dignity in command positions. General Chen returned to his quiet retirement, but his handling of the crisis earned him invitations to speak at military academies about leadership and crisis management. His message remained consistent. True authority comes from service to others, not from the power to command. The young soldiers who witnessed the incident carried the lessons with them throughout their own military careers, understanding that rank without character is meaningless, and that real leadership is demonstrated through grace under pressure rather than the exercise of power over others.